Hello, everyone. We are once again here for another amazing Money Monday. We have another great speaker who we've had before. And last time Shannon was with us, we spent probably 90 minutes with so much good information. I will tell you, Shannon really set the stage of sharing some of those good numbers. It really makes a difference as we are trying to figure out what next steps. How are we going to make things work? How are we going to make decisions? Sometimes evaluating good decisions if you're going to be that real estate investor. And so we really wanted to cover a lot more in that session, but it didn't make sense for us to have a 3-hour presentation. So we just decided we do a part 2. And so I won't spend too much time doing an introduction because her intro and her bio is in the invite, and you can definitely see it on part 1 as well. But I want to, without further ado, turn it over to Shannon Jones.
Thank you, guys. And thank you so much for having me back. First of all, there are only 5 slides in my presentation today. We will not be looking at 30 slides, and there are no spreadsheets as part of this presentation. So I hope you guys enjoy it. I've tried to streamline it for a change. So let's go ahead and get started with the presentation. Today, we are going to be talking about managing your clients. And in this case, your clients are your tenants. So, and that's really the framework I want us to come from. We're going to think about our tenants as neighbors instead of tenants, because we don't want to exercise that power dynamic. We really want to try to come at this as a partnership and not as one above the other. So I'm going to start with what we will do today is we're going to talk about the beginning. We're going to talk about the middle. We're going to talk about the end. And then I will answer any questions and questions that you may have. So we'll go ahead and get started. So in thinking about the beginning, I'm sorry, did we do next slide? Okay, perfect. So the slide, do you have the beginning slide? Wonderful. So in the very beginning of your process, you are responsible for marketing your property. So you've got to make sure that it's in good working condition. You have to make sure it's beautiful and that it's appealing to a potential quote unquote buyer or quote unquote renter. It's also important to know where to place your unit on the market. I used to use Craigslist a long time ago, but there are some strange people on Craigslist. So I ultimately decided that I went with Trulia, Zillow, apartments.com. But if you use, it doesn't matter whatever format you use, you must post pictures. Otherwise, your prospective tenants are not going to be interested. You're not going to wet the whistle there. Okay. You also have to know what external factors are going on inside your market. So when you set the price of your rental unit, you need to look around and see what's going on. Look around at your neighbors and see what they're renting their units for. And because you don't want to be outside of that spectrum. First of all, you don't want to be super low. That's number one. But you also don't want to be super high. You want to be somewhere right in the middle. Okay, right in the middle of things. So after you know that, you also need to know what's going on in the market. For instance, I'm 2 blocks from the metro, which worked for a little bit of time, but then the 8th Street district and the Atlas district started really popping off. Like they really started growing. So instead of marketing to the metro folks, I started marketing to people who wanted to live near the Atlas district. So you got to know your community. You got to know what the rental market is around there, and any other external factors. For instance, COVID, right? That is a huge external factor. So understanding what's going on now with COVID, it is likely that if your unit is empty, that you will have a harder time filling that unit than under normal circumstances, because number one, no one wants to move. No one wants to upend all of that. So it's important that you have to understand what's going on in the outside of the world. So you're going to show it, right? And you're going to keep showing this unit until you have a security deposit, the first month's rent, and the pro rata for the month when that when that neighbor is moving in. Okay, so let me explain that again. I was in a position where I actually had a verbal agreement with someone I showed the apartment to. They were like, yeah, I'll be there today, with my money ready to sign the lease. And lo and behold, they never came. They never came. They didn't show up. And I was flabbergasted because, of course, I had canceled all of my future showings. And I said, okay, the apartment's no longer available, blah, blah, blah. And then she didn't show up. So this is how I learned that you're going to keep that unit on the market until you physically have a signed lease and some money, meaning the security deposit and the prorated rent. Okay. First month's rent, prorated, and the security deposit. That's really very important because you don't want to sell yourself short like I did. I learned from my mistakes. So that's really great. So now, as you're showing, you're going to go through the application process. Okay. The application process, it really is a way for you to begin to understand who your neighbors may be. I will show the units myself. If they ask whether or not I'm the owner, I will tell them. But sometimes, the subject never comes up. And, obviously I'm listening to what they're talking about. And, I'm bending, my ear a little bit to see what's going on with them. They might say things like, well, we're only going to be here for a month. Now, I can't technically use that as a way to self-select someone out of the housing process. But it's just something I heard. It's just something I heard in the background. Okay, we're moving on. If the person is not kind, I mean, it's little things, like when you go in for a job interview, you talk to the secretary as if you were talking to the interviewer, because he's going to go back out and he's going to say, how was she? Was she nice? And essentially, you're going to get a kind of a first impression evaluation from that individual. So it's important that that the individual be kind, and that they have the right attitude, and that and essentially that they're someone you would want to live next door to. Is this a person that I would want to live next door to? Okay. Now you've got an application. It's fully completed. At this point, it's very important that you give the required disclosures by your city and by your state and county. Okay. So in DC, there are disclosures that are required even before the individual goes to application. So it's important that, one, you know that, and two, that you provide them those required disclosures. That's really super important. If you don't, you're not in compliance and you have an issue.
And see some examples of those disclosures for people to kind of be aware of, or where should they go find some of those?
Wonderful. You can, okay. So you can go to the Housing Authority. Actually, what I could do is I could share the link to that information with you, Rosalind, and maybe you can go ahead and post it at the same time.
Yeah.
Because off the top of my head, I can't think. I haven't had a vacancy in so long, knock on wood. But one of the disclosures shows the history of the rent for that particular unit. It shows, the last time it was increased. It shows who I am. It talks about my certification number, my certification number for the district. When I register my business with the the district's Consumer and Regulatory Affairs Office. So it's pretty lengthy, but it's required. And also the tenant has what's called a tenant bill of rights that you also must give before before the client comes in. You're actually going to give it an application before the application, so that they understand their housing rights. So this is housing. You know, there are a lot of regulations around this area, so it's important that you are in compliance. Okay, I'm looking at the time, so I'm going to keep us moving. So when you take the application, you are going to get a credit report. You're going to get 2 weeks pay stubs, the last 2 weeks of pay stubs. So basically, you're going to get a month's worth of income. You need to verify that. And you need references. So really what you're trying to do is ascertain what type of individual this is. Are they reliable? The predictor of future activity is past activity. So if this individual in the past has paid their bills on time, it is likely they will pay you on time. And you can extrapolate that information from their credit report. Things like that. On the application, I also have their previous landlord and their previous address and their previous landlord's contact information. I want to get in touch with that landlord and see what their tenancy was like at that landlord's place. That'll give me some idea as to the reliability of that individual. All right. And then references. If they give you references, please check them. I mean, there's 3 on my application, and it would not be wise for me to ignore that information. So check those references and keep it moving. Okay. Any questions about the application process so far? All right, we're moving forward. So at this point, you have the tenants, you have the neighbors. Application, you've got their credit report, you have their references, you have their application, you've given them their required disclosures, and now it's time for you to make a decision. I've got 3 applicants in front of me. Which one is best, and who do I want to live with? Who do I want to have as my neighbor? And the way I make this decision, it goes back to my lending. Really, my lending experience. I basically underwrite the application as I would a loan. My question to myself is, would I give this individual a loan for X amount of dollars? And that X amount of dollars is the amount of your annualized rent. Okay. So let's say you're charging $1,000 a month, and you have an individual that you want to rent to. You say to yourself, well, would I give this person a $12,000 unsecured loan? Because that's basically what you're doing. You're giving this individual a loan that's unsecured, so you have no collateral tied to it. So you need to make sure that this individual can afford it, and that they're going to be reliable with it. I mean, obviously, this is your investment. So if you don't get the income from your investment, it's just sitting there. It's just sitting there doing nothing for you. All right. So at the lease execution, it's time to get signatures and start getting some money. So you're going to get signatures. I like to send the lease directly to the neighbor before lease signing. That usually cuts down on the amount of time I spend at lease signing, explaining every line of the lease. And actually it makes them feel comfortable too, because they can look at the lease beforehand and ask any questions that they have. So that helps with that piece. And when you get the money, by the way, oh gosh, I've been doing this for so long that initially we did checks. Y'all remember checks? Okay, so So literally I would go, they would mail me their checks, or I would go door to door and I would get their checks, which was really terrible. So let's thank PayPal, Cash App, Zelle, all that stuff where you can get your money electronically. I actually use PayPal because I like the record keeping functions and features that they have, but use something electronically for those payments. Cool. Um, Really, and this is a part where you can start beginning, you can start to begin building a relationship with your neighbors. Because on move-in day, they're going to have, a big old truck with all this stuff that they have to move into their place. And so you start asking things like, and really, this is just the nice neighborly thing to do. Is there something I can do to help you move in? Do you need my assistance? Um, no one ever takes me up on that. Hmm. Maybe it's because they don't want their landlord looking through their stuff. I mean, I wouldn't be looking through their stuff, but the reality is people don't tend to want their landlord, helping them. So I've never had anyone take me up on that offer. Hmm. Curious. Be flexible, help wherever you can in that tenancy, in that turnover. You may also give that neighbor keys before their actual date of possession. Now, I'm not talking about a week or a month. I'm talking about, they come to you and they say, "Oh, well, the truck, we need to get access to the apartment, the night before," and you're like, oh, "Of course." You give them the keys, and that's that. Just remember that the keys equal possession. So whoever the owner of the keys, or whoever's holding the keys, they have possession of the unit. That is their property at that point. Um, and at the end of the day, if you don't want to do all this, you have a couple of options. You can use a property management firm. And that property management firm generally charges somewhere between 3 to 5% of the rent, to manage the properties. When a unit is vacant, they will usually take the first month's rent as a fee. So, because I am frugal, I have decided to do this myself. Um, and quite frankly, this is something you can do. It's not that tough, as you can see. All right. Any questions about the beginning stage of our stuff? Okay. Hearing none, I'm moving on. Okay, so let's talk about the middle of the process. Okay. This is all about maintaining and building a relationship. And I think this is something that can really make or break that that entire process. So the first thing I recommend, I'm sorry, Jessica, next slide. If we're not on the slide that says the middle process. Okay, wonderful. Um, so this can really make or break really your investment and the return on it. So I try to make emotional deposits into every relationship that I have with my neighbors. For instance, when they move in, I will have a little potted plant and a little card that says welcome home. Okay, look, that's not a big deal. How much did it cost me to get that little potted plant? Maybe $10, and a little card, a little note that says welcome home. But what a pleasant thing to move into. And automatically, it's a nice, pleasant surprise from the very beginning. And I will leave that in their unit so that when they open the door, there's their potted plant. So it's little things like that, making those little emotional deposits that really help build that relationship. Also, I had a construction project going on, and I knew it would be a nightmare. It was going to be a nightmare for everyone, the noise and the banging and the clicking and the clamming. So I gave each of my neighbors a little gift bag with some earplugs for the noise, and some little snacks, a little card in there that basically says, while we're under construction, I appreciate your patience. And so it's really just little stuff like that. Oh, also, I send birthday text messages. Okay, so how do I know what their birthday is? Well, it's on the application. Okay, so I just go in and put it in my phone as a reoccurring appointment. Then every year I text Bob and say happy birthday. So it's little stuff like that that really helps build that relationship with your neighbors. Um, oh, the other thing I've done in the past is I've actually waived a late fee in the past. Um, I usually waive the first fee. Um, and by doing that, I build some, some equity, build some equity within that relationship. So that certainly helps. And people actually really very much appreciate it. And I've found that um, they will never make that mistake again or any other mistake again because you've been working with them. All right. So we talked about making those emotional deposits. Now we're going to talk about communication style. I ask my tenants, neighbors, I ask my neighbors what their preferred way of communication is, whether they like text or email, what have you. They want me to send a letter. Um, so that I can understand what their preferred method of communication is. At the same time, it gives me an opportunity to talk about my preferred method of communication and when to use what. So I'm laying the foundation for boundaries, setting boundaries, expectations, which is super important because I'm going to respect their boundaries, but at the same time, I would like my boundaries respected as well. So I prefer to be texted under these circumstances. If it's an emergency, here's what I would prefer that you do, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it just gives a clear outline of who's doing what at what point. Also, when there is an issue, like a maintenance issue of some type, or something I need to follow up on, I always under promise and over deliver. So I will tell the neighbor, I'll say, well, it's going to take me 48 hours to get this done. When I know in my mind it'll probably take 8 hours. But it's really, really great when you've actually delivered earlier than was expected and everyone's happy. Everyone's happy during that. So you're going to be really super responsive. Um, at the end of the day, if you don't want to do all this, you're going to hire a property management firm, which is going to, the property management firm will charge you a fee of 3 to 5% of your rents. And of course, the vacancy rate for your rent. And you're going to go about your day because at the end of the day, your decision is they will bring you the information. You tell them who you want to lease to. They handle all of the rents. They actually are the third party intermediary between you and the tenant. So there, you really don't get directly involved with the tenants, neighbors. Why do I keep saying tenants? I never call my folks tenants. Anyway, expect the unexpected. This is talking about maintenance and upkeep. So we know there's going to be repairs that are required. We know you're going to have to do routine maintenance. Make sure you have those things set up in advance. For instance, your lawn care, your monthly pest control, snow removal in our area because we get snow, trash, because of course in DC, they will not pick up my trash because I'm commercial. They consider me commercial. They don't consider me residential. So know that these maintenance issues are going to come up and have someone on retainer to step in quickly to handle any issues. Again, this goes back to building the relationship. How would you feel if you were that individual and you were out of heat and it's 90 degrees outside? I would not be a happy camper if I was in that space and I was sweating like that. I don't like to sweat. So really just make sure that you are a good citizen, a good neighbor, just a good person of integrity when you're working with your neighbors. Okay. And at the end, of course, after you expect the unexpected, you are going to, if you want to avoid all of this, work with a property management firm. Okay. Are there any other questions about the middle of the process? This is maintaining relationships.
Nope, nothing yet.
Good. Hearing none, let's move forward. All right. So now it's time for the end of the process. Your tenants have lived with you for many years. They've been very happy, but now they're buying their own home. First of all, you're elated for them because now they're growing their wealth, they're growing their family stability, becoming an active member of the community and long term. So you're happy for them. But on the other side, you're like, oh gosh, here I am again. I've got a unit that I have to quote unquote turn over. And the question is, in your lease, you should have something that indicates the number of days or how long you want this period to be for the advance notice. So for instance, in my lease, it says 45 days. So what I'm asking the client to do is, okay, please give me 45 days notice before you leave. And what I found that it is, if I have done a good job of making these emotional deposits and being responsive, I have found that my neighbors will work with me during that time period and allow me to show their unit before the unit becomes vacant. That's really, really critical because folks are going to want to move into that new spot, and that's what we're counting on. But at the same time, you have to be able to show that unit. So if your tenants are willing, then that's great. If they're not, then you're dealing with a situation where they've moved out and now you have to get the unit ready for the next individual. It's empty. Every single day that unit is empty, you are losing money. So you want to be in a position where you are not losing any money and you want to try to get that unit tenanted as soon as possible. Let's see. We talked about, well, the voluntary vacancies are in the event that the tenant gives you notice. The forced vacancies, however, are in the event that you need to evict someone. And this really is the reality of it's part of our business. It's not pretty. And I'm going to share with you a horror story that I lived through so you can learn from me. But it's really not pretty, but it's really part of the business. This is the risk of doing business in the business that we're in. So with a forced eviction, obviously you have to make sure you're filed with all of the, you have all the property credentials filed with the DC. Well, I'm in DC. I don't know where everyone is, but with DC Department of Consumer and Regulatory Affairs it's a process. And I will tell you that when I had a situation, I actually hired a landlord and tenant attorney to help me go through this part. I did, first of all, I was not skilled enough. Oh, yes, I could have done my own research and figured it out, but I felt more comfortable, handing that off to someone who knew real estate law and could help get the best outcome for me. So y'all want to hear about my horror story?
Of course.
Okay.
Not the good, but the bad is part of the process too.
This is going to be so good. Okay, so I had a young man. First of all, I still have feelings about this. So forgive me if I start to get agitated. So I had a young man who decided that he wasn't going to pay his rent. So on the sixth day, on the sixth day of the first late payment, that is when I served an eviction notice. And people say, why did you do it on the sixth day? That is not kind. Yes, it is, because at the end of the day, you need to help people understand that there are consequences for their actions or for their non-action. So if on that sixth day they haven't paid their rent, you start the eviction process. And then everyone knows what to expect. And at that point, the neighbor will say, well, I got to make sure I pay my rent on time because she's going to evict me on day 6. Isn't that something? So let's go back to this young man who decided that he was not going to pay me rent. Of course, I go through the process. On day 6, I'm serving him, blah, blah, blah. Here comes the next month. He doesn't pay. The next month, he doesn't pay. The next month, he doesn't pay. The next month, he doesn't pay. Let's just say he was in here for 9 months. 9 months. And I collected no rent from him. And when the attorney got involved, she says to me, every day he's in that unit and you have no income coming in, you're losing money. And at that point, I was so angry that I wanted, I just said, I don't care, let's figure out how to get him out. But at the same time, I was losing money. I had to realize that I had to cut my losses and move forward with a fresh start. So she recommended that I pay him to leave. Now, y'all know how I felt about that, right? I don't know if you know how I felt about that. I was not happy because here's someone who hasn't paid me over 9 months, and now she's recommending that I pay him to leave. Well, guess what I did? I paid him to leave. I sure did. I was not happy, but if you look at the big picture of things, I can't get that unit back on the market until he's out. So I have to I have to make it easy really for him to leave. And actually,
that's a good point that you make,
okay,
especially for landlords today. So because a lot of people will say cash for keys, basically,
that's
right,
right.
if you leave. And so right now in the midst of COVID, depending on which jurisdiction you're in, you
Mhm.
may or may not be able to evict.
Yeah,
So you got to,
yeah,
is it going to take you another, and even without COVID, in certain jurisdictions, it's just simply tenant friendly. So
yeah.
unfortunately, it's a hard check to write.
Ooh,
Um,
I
but
had to have someone else write it, Rosalind, and I just signed it. Okay. So yeah, it was really a hard check to write. You're right about that. But we had already started the eviction process, and in DC, it is a tenant friendly city. Just hands down. The tenant has pretty much all of the power. So that's why it's important on the front end as you begin to make a decision about the individual you're putting in. That's the only thing you have to control. So you got to make the best possible decision as far as that's concerned. Because you put the wrong person in there, well, then you're going to have problems. So yeah, I'm thinking about that whole thing, and I'm crying inside.
Now, in retrospect, would you have made that offer maybe sooner?
Yes. Oh my gosh. Again, going back to the idea that every single day that unit is vacant or not being paid for, I am losing money. So it was one of those situations where I dug my heels in the ground and I said, I'm not doing this. It's a matter of principle. He should be paying his rent and I'm not going to do it. But actually, that was really not a decision that was in my best interest. It just felt good at the time.
And Shannon, in that respect, do you then just erase all of the back rent as well? So do you sign some type of agreement at that moment?
Yeah. Now, here's what happened. The landlord, the L&T attorney said, well, you can go back and you could sue this individual for X amount of dollars, but that's going to take you time. I'm going to charge you blah, blah, blah. So at this point, Channing, it's going to be better if you just wash your hands of it. And that's exactly what I did.
And Jenny, we have a question. She's
Oh,
asked, how much did you pay him? I guess to kind
oh, okay. I paid him moving cost. Okay. I didn't actually pay him and say, here's your money. It was, I'm going to help you with moving expenses. I believe it was $2,500 at that time. I was really livid. I was livid. But you just have to have the right perspective on things. So that's my eviction horror story. I bet there's other landlords out there who have some eviction horror stories. If you do, I want to hear them.
but
I
just
don't want
I mean, but just to only have the one is a great thing.
that.
I wish
That is,
would
and I certainly learned a lot from that process. I did, but I'm
because
still,
you
I'm
don't
still a
have.
little bit. Hmm?
I was going to say, because even if you don't have tenants that you actually have to get to the point of eviction, I've had a tenant who literally was late and we got to the court date phase for 9 months
Yes,
straight.
yes,
And because like Shannon, I'm in DC and DC is tenant friendly. If she paid before that court date, it starts the clock all over. And so oftentimes her court date would be where her rent is already late for the next month.
right.
So I am going down to file for the next month while getting the case dismissed for the file for the previous month. And so even those kind of things like that,
Yeah,
just in and of itself, I was getting money, but it
right,
was so far behind. I mean, I was getting probably paid 6 weeks out from
right.
the day they were spent. I'm so happy for her to leave.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I was really, and to make it even more scandalous, this individual actually worked for the city of Washington, D.C. So I probably shouldn't have disclosed that, although I did not tell his name. So
there's a lot of men that work for the
there are
cities.
a lot of men. Okay, so let me just move on from there because I have some serious feelings about that. But again, it gave me this perspective on things like, okay, your client is your tenant or neighbor. That's who you're working for. So your job is to keep them happy. They are paying for my lifestyle, for the lifestyle that I live, for me to travel and buy things and all kinds of other stuff. So when you have that perspective and you don't approach it as a power struggle type situation where it's between you and the neighbor, then I found you have much better results for sure.
And
Um,
if we have another question,
oh,
as far as
okay.
making the right decision on who makes it in, so when you're doing your selection process, how do you work around the discrimination laws?
You can't discriminate. I mean, I don't know what. I'm sorry to whoever asked that question, but there are housing. Okay, let's get serious. There are housing and regulatory standards that must be met. If you don't meet them, you are in trouble, like serious trouble. So, if and when you need help with that, consult a L&T attorney, landlord tenant attorney. Um, because it's vitally important. Like, for instance, the disclosures that I have to give before the tenant applies. If I don't give that disclosure, technically, I can't collect my rent. If I don't file or register my LLC with the city and pay my taxes every year, my business is not in good standing and I cannot collect rent. So it's just a matter of understanding the law, and when you need help, pull in an expert. You're not expected to know everything, but expect to know who to go to. Know who to go to if there is an issue.
But definitely creating your criteria. I think that's in the very beginning. So if
Oh, sure.
rent needs to be, your income needs to be 2 or 3 times rent, or if you're looking for a certain credit history, if you're looking for certain information from their references, because I remember I was doing the screening process and I require certain people to be references. So I need your employer. That's going to be somebody that I'm going to reach out to. And the person would not call me back. And funny enough, I always say sometimes things come out in that process because they wouldn't call me back. He was adamant that I didn't need to speak to them anyway. And that's fine. If you don't want me to, you just don't need to live here. But he actually got verbally abusive on the phone with me because this person would not call me back, and he didn't feel like that should be a hold up in getting approved. And so sometimes just being diligent in your process will reveal enough about the character of the person that you're dealing with. I've had a couple of those run-ins where I've had to block their number, or just, throw them to the junk mail and so forth, just because the communication, if I'm saying I need these things in order to make a decision and I refuse to move forward without it, sometimes that'll show the character of the person you're dealing with too.
And it's something, because even things as little as scheduling an appointment and not showing for that appointment. If you don't show for that first appointment, I'm not going to show to you anymore. Or if you cancel at the last minute, that's something I keep in the back of my brain. I'm like, oh, maybe there was something that came up, but it begins to show you a pattern of behavior that you just question. You question. So in terms of specific things that I'm looking for, going back to what Rosalind said, I'm looking for income. I'm looking to make sure you can afford this rent along with your other monthly liabilities. That's what when I look at the credit report and I look at your other monthly liabilities, and I make sure that those numbers or that percentage that I want, in my case, I want no more than 25% of your liabilities, of your income, to be liabilities. Not all liabilities. Let me rephrase that. I want the rent payment, the entire month's payment, to be no greater than 25% of your monthly income. If it's outside of it, then I want some additional information to make me feel comfortable. I might ask for bank statements. I've been known to do that. Although, it's kind of intrusive. I don't like really a bank statement, but at least some evidence that you have both a checking and savings account with a bank. When I'm looking at the pay stub, it's interesting. When I'm looking at the pay stub, I look and see, I see if they're making any contributions to 401k. Again, that's none of my business. It just gives me a sense of who this individual is. So I'm not going to make a decision based on whether or not they put money into their 401k. It just gives me an idea of this individual. Are they a saver, etc.? What other questions do we have, Rosalind?
That's all that we have at the moment.
Okay. Well, believe it or not, I am done, I believe, with everything. Oh, no. When you have a unit that is vacant, or it's time to now turn over keys, we have what's called a walkthrough checklist. And this is basically where you go around and you say, hey, I see this here, and hey, I see this there. And you're essentially telling your neighbor, okay, this is outside of what I would consider normal wear and tear. Listen, guys, you are going to paint that unit after every single tenant leaves. You can't consider that the tenant's responsibility, right? You can't charge them to paint that unit. Would you agree, Rosalind?
Yes, unless unless I would say is if they paint a color that then I have to put.
Oh, of course.
If I have to do extra to get it back to where it was.
Of course.
It should be a simple paint over kind of job. And if it's anything outside of a simple paint over job where, I have to do some extra layers or,
absolutely. That is a wonderful.
Holes bigger than I usually say holes bigger than a nail, those kind of things. Mm-hmm. Yeah, then I'm charging them.
Yeah. So I completely agree with you. In my lease, it actually says before you paint, you must get my authorization. So if you paint without my authorization, then I am going to charge you because you didn't get my authorization. Or I'm going to expect that you return it to the original condition when you distribute your keys, when you turn your keys back in. Also, so you're with the neighbor and you're looking at things that are outside the normal wear and tear, and you're giving them an idea. You're saying this is something that's outside of wear and tear, so that when they receive their security deposit back, there are no surprises. You don't want any surprises. You don't want them to feel caught off guard. So you're pointing these things out, and at the same time, it gives you an opportunity to end the relationship on a very strong note. Because if you have a good tenant, you want good tenants to continue coming to you. So you want people to refer people to you. I've had many tenants refer people to me. I actually begin to advertise my vacant units with the tenants that are in my building right now. I said, hey guys, we have a unit that's going to open up. If you know anybody that's looking, let me know. And so that kind of helps, because obviously, birds of a feather flock together. So if they're people of good character, then they're going to refer people of good character. So what were we talking about? Oh, the security deposit. So after your normal wear and tear items, so anything that is outside of the normal wear and tear, you're going to subtract that from the security deposit. Now, you need someone to come in and tell you how much that is. Okay, Mr. Contractor, how much is it going to cost me to repair this wall? How much is it going to cost me to refinish this section of a floor? You're not the expert there. So you need to get someone to give you a quote on how much that is going to be. And that is what comes out of the security deposit. And in DC, you're actually required to send them a notice of vacancy. And you actually have 90 days to send this notice. And essentially what it says is, here is your security deposit. Here is the amount of interest that you earned on that deposit. Because, by the way, in DC, that security deposit needs to be in an interest-bearing account. Okay, so here's the amount of interest you earn, subtotal, minus any repairs that are outside of normal wear and tear. And here's your security deposit. So I have 90 days by law to do that, but I don't. People are counting on this to help with their moving expenses and things of that nature. So I usually do 30 days or so. Oh my gosh, we're at 750.
Now, Shannon, one question I'll have about the security deposit. How do you return your security deposit?
That's a great question. I do not do it electronically. For that, I do a certified check. You ask such great questions, Rosalind. For that, I do a certified check. And in the memo section of that check, I'll write what it's for. I'll attach it with the notice that says, how I came up with that compilation or that dollar amount. And I send it to the tenant by US mail.
And an additional layer to that, I actually send it certified. Just because I'm sending it with an official check, I don't get a chance to see when it was cashed. And funny enough, I had an amazing tenant that moved out this year. He was great. He wanted another roommate and moved kind of close to the waterfront, which can't blame that. But I sent him his deposit like my normal schedule. And probably 2 months later, he sends me an email and says, I never got it. And I'm like, there's no way that, this time I can tell you the day, and I keep the receipt.
Oh, yes.
I know when it was sent.
Oh, yes.
And come to find out, he never did a change of address. It was sitting in the mailbox here.
Oh my goodness.
And it took me a minute to go through and kind of figure out where it was. But had I not known that, Or
Mhm.
I've had tenants who said, no, I never got it. And I was able to give them the tracking number and them contact the post office
Sure,
to kind of see where it
sure.
is.
Mhm.
But the last thing you want to do is your word against theirs in terms of I sent it and they're saying that they haven't gotten it and so forth. So I also send a certified check and I send it through certified mail.
You
Every
know, Rosalind is, I'm frugal. I don't want to spend that postal. Isn't that silly? It's again, that's one of those things where you cut off your nose to spite your face. Pay that extra money. But at the same time, the bank does have procedures in place. If that certified check does get lost, they can actually reissue that certified check. But just
that costs
know,
$30 versus the $3.
you
The
know,
$3
well,
the certified mail.
I know, right? I'm, oh, that's so silly. Um, but sometimes I can pull a few strings and they waive that fee for me at the again. I'm so silly sometimes. Just do, just do everything you can to protect yourself and your position. You certainly don't want to get into a he said, she said situation. What other questions are there? This is great.
Let's see. I don't see any other. Oh, someone did ask. She said, "Do you let tenants know that you own the property, or do you pretend just to
Oh,
be another tenant as well?"
yeah. So when I show the unit, if it comes up, if it's asked, I will answer. But if it's not asked, I don't openly disclose.
Yeah, I usually just say I'm the property manager, and then they
That
continue.
works too, because that's true.
That's true.
That's true.
That's what my email signature says, and everything else. I'm just
That's
the
right.
property manager.
Good.
All
These are
right.
good questions.
Let's see, ladies, do we have any more questions? I'll let Shannon do her final remarks as you all give us the last few of your questions as well. I think this is good stuff because especially we talk a lot about like the house hacking, which makes home ownership a lot more affordable for so many people. And some people are kind of hesitant to do the house hacking because you are living with your tenants. You're living in a different unit, you have a different door, you have your different space. But in terms of how much interaction that you have and how much you want to have in terms of your boundaries, I have some tenants that we never ever would speak. I would rarely see them when I go in and out. I've had tenants where they invited me to their wedding. And so they were absolutely great tenants. And that's actually why he moved. He was getting married and decided they needed a bigger place and so forth. So I've had tenants who are absolutely amazing
Of
and we
course.
stayed in contact and so forth. But in terms of how friendly you want to be, you definitely want to gauge that, but keep that strong arm between I am still your landlord, you are still the tenant. So there are not that many exceptions that can be made outside of the lease itself. And I think sometimes that line can get blurred.
Sure.
But just to understand that you are still the landlord and they are still the tenant. And
Right.
so just making kind of arbitrary rules just because they are now kind of friendly with you, you really have to say, oh, wait, but
Hold
your
on.
still says.
Let's go to page 10 of the lease
Yeah.
and let's see what the lease says about that. That sort of thing. You're so right. Sorry to cut you off there.
Josie says, how do you find maintenance person?
Oh, well, I have someone who I've been working with for years and years and years, and I have a relationship with him. He and I have a relationship. So he gets all of my jobs, and his commitment to me is timely and responsive and fair pricing, reasonable, fair pricing. So it's all about building those relationships. I hope
And
I answered
I
that.
found a couple of good people through recommendations.
Oh, yes.
So, for example, my HVAC person was a recommendation. I've worked with him probably 5 years, 4 years, 5 years at this point. And like Shannon said, when the heat is out, the air is out, those are things that are non-negotiable and nobody's happy about that.
No.
I keep space heaters and I keep
Oh, yes.
space fan because in that meantime,
Yes.
as we're waiting, I'll drop the heaters off as we wait on them to come.
Absolutely.
But because we have radiator heat, DC and old.
Mhm.
But but the boilers are in the basement. And I remember him saying, this is a busy day for me. I can
Mhm.
come before I actually go to another job at 3 in the morning. And I'm like, okay, you're gonna be in the basement. That's fine. I can wake up at 3 in the morning. But only because I've known him for so long. Whatever he says, that's it. We
That's
pay it.
what
That's it. And so, sure enough, that tenant was like, "Oh, the heat was on when I woke up," and
mhm.
that's just a nice surprise.
It's a nice surprise.
Um, and so, I actually keep a lockbox. So if I'm not there, he'll have access and have a key. And I'm always just like, "Yeah, you know the code to the lockbox. You can come on in." And
Yeah,
that way, I can still go to work. I can still do things that I need to do. If
that's
I'm going to be out of town,
mhm.
I'll let him know, hey, I'm going to be out of town. And I require all my tenants to send service requests via email. So I can just forward the email directly to him. I can respond while I'm out of town. He can still go in, take care of whatever it is, and then I can pay him electronically. So nobody even knows that I'm gone. But if you don't have kind of a network of people that you can ask, I love Nextdoor.
Oh, yes.
So the app itself is, and if you don't have it, definitely check it out. But Nextdoor is kind of a social media for your neighbors, and you are literally locked into people who are in your direct vicinity. And you can just say, "Hey, I'm looking for someone to do some electrical work, or I'm just looking for
Mhm,
someone to do some handyman jobs, or what have you." And your neighbors will be the one to vouch for somebody.
mhm.
And usually, multiple neighbors will recommend the same person. So if I see the same name, so for example, my move in and move out cleans, that lady is somebody that I've gotten from next door. Honestly, I've used her probably the last year and a half or so. And I sent a text message. She's always responsive. She always fits me in the schedule and all those kind of things. So those are the kind of things that if you don't have a true network where you can ask someone else because you don't have a lot of friends who are landlords as well or homeowners as well, then you can simply go to Nextdoor, type in whatever it is that you're looking for. So you can ask your neighbors, "I'm looking for something," or in the search box, you can just say, "Looking for electrician," what have you. See
Mhm,
who comes up more often, see who has like good things to say about them, and reach out to that person.
mhm. The one thing I would add on to the Nextdoor piece is there are all sorts of groups within Nextdoor. So I belong to the DC landlord group, and that group specifically is for landlords. And so it's a great way to say deal with any problems or to cross pollinate ideas or any of that those things. So try to find a landlord group as well, so you can network within that group. Cool. Any other questions? You know I love questions. Oh, and don't forget about your relationship with your realtor. A lot of things that I've been able to accomplish have been referrals from my realtor as well.
Oh, that does bring me to a question. So there are realtors who will help people find
Oh, yes.
rental. I
Yeah.
pay realtors. Do you pay?
Going back to the concept of frugality, I'm frugal. I do not pay for, I just don't pay, you know? That's terrible. I believe in paying for a service if I have a high need for that particular service, and that particular service is outside my bailiwick. For instance, the landlord tenant attorney. Of course, I'm going to pay that individual. I don't have that expertise. Um, but for certain things, I just, I feel like I can handle those myself.
But definitely, once you list your property, you're going to get calls from realtors.
Oh,
I always
God.
get calls from nonprofits and veteran associations and things like that. So just be kind of aware of some of the questions that you'll get. Um, be aware of things that are discriminatory. So in DC, you can't discriminate based on income. And so that means, regardless of where that income comes from. And so you want to be aware of that because you'll get a lot of random questions that say, "Oh, do you take vouchers?" Or um, "Do you have XYZ in terms of entrance ways," and so forth. So you want to be prepared
Right.
for some of those questions, but
Mhm.
it's always the people that want to know, will you pay the realtor fee? And I always say no.
Yeah, I'm not really interested in that. Sorry, realtors. Love y'all
Just
though.
ask,
Love y'all.
how many rentals do you have?
A total of 8 units. I live in one. So yeah, that answers that one.
And I actually sold one. Thank goodness. I had absolutely horrible tenants in one of my single family homes. Thank goodness that's over. And finally just decided to sell that one and kind of get out of that one. And now I'm just with the 4 and I live in one as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, that whole idea of paying someone to leave, I still can't get over that. But I would have done it a lot. Live and learn. Live and learn.
And I
It's
think it
smart.
goes back to something you said too about just relationship and community, because as a landlord, especially if you don't have a number of other landlords around you,
Mhm.
you kind of need people to help you stay grounded, but understand that this is still a business.
Of course.
I remember talking to my mom, and I had a tenant who was not paying, and it was around Christmas time, and she had just had a baby. And my mom says, "Oh my gosh, you're going to put them out?" And I said, "Well, they had a number of months to know that this baby was coming."
9.
Exactly. And at the same time, Christmas is not a necessity, but housing is. And
True.
so, am I supposed to pay for them to live in a home? And so you don't necessarily want people like that to be in your landlord corner. You can be understanding and say, I'll waive a late fee.
Yes.
But I mean, to give a free month of rent, it would be, would I pay
No,
rent for anyone else just to live, some stranger, not a family member? I
I
probably
would probably not do that for
walked up to
family
me on the
either.
street, I wouldn't say yes. I would be okay paying your rent for the month of December because you want to spend money on Christmas presents. So
Right.
you definitely want to be logical in your communication. Be friendly enough. I didn't say, well, you shouldn't have done or you should have done. It's just simply the rent is due on this day, it's late on this day, evictions
Matter of
on
fact.
this day. It's very simple.
It's a matter of fact.
Um,
And I think
Somebody
that,
says,
uh-huh.
do you prefer Section 8 tenants?
I don't, I've never rented to a Section 8 tenant. So I don't have a preference one way or the other. I do know that the process has a lot more bells and whistles with it, and it can complicate the process. So I just, I try to keep my life simple.
And definitely, if you're going to rent, I don't have any Section 8 tenants and I don't have any Section 8 experience. I do know some landlords who are strictly in the Section 8 kind of market. And so they have a number of them. It definitely is a little bit different. So you want to be up to date in terms of some of the things, in terms of the inspections that they do. In our locality, it's harder for the eviction process. I have a friend who is an attorney, and she talked about the eviction process after they had done $70,000 worth of damage. I couldn't believe
Oh my God.
$70,000 worth of damage was even possible. Um, but those are the type of things that you want to, of course, make sure that you have a team available to quickly jump in and help and consult. Shannon mentioned a great realtor. We have the same realtor. I have texted him on a number of occasions just to say, hey, I have a quick question. You can't get all the free information, but you definitely want to have enough of a relationship that you could get a
Mhm.
free question every now and then and get some up-to-date information from people who are doing this 24/7.
Yeah, and I think one of the things for me it goes back to is do not um, do not accept my kindness as weakness. I'm a pretty kind individual. I was raised that way. Thank you, Mama. But at the same time, this is business, and you are paying me to provide you a service, and my job is to provide that service. But your job is to pay me. So this is, a reciprocal relationship. And if you don't live up to your end of the bargain, well, we're going to have to make some changes. So it is what it is. But you don't have to be mean about it, is what I'm saying. You can still be kind and be strong.
Always refer to your lease.
Always. Page 10, especially. Page 10 of that lease is where all the stuff is. You can just say, oh, let's take a look at the lease together. It's on page 10. So yes, make sure that whatever you need, whatever you want, if it's not in that lease, it didn't exist. You can't have a verbal agreement between someone to say, well, I'm going to pay $100 a month for XYZ. Well, if it's not in the lease, it didn't happen. So you must specify. what everything is, what the agreement is in the lease. I think I'm done. I have talked a lot.
Any additional questions, ladies? And while we're getting the additional questions from the ladies, Shannon, you want to do any final remarks?
My final remarks are this. This can be a risk, as with any type of transaction, business transaction. You have risk and you have reward. So you have to weigh whether or not the risk that you're willing to take is worth the reward. Now, in my experience and what's happened for me in managing this process, it works for me. But this might not be something that works for you. So do a risk benefit analysis of this process and see where you are with that. But don't get into an undertaking that you don't understand and you're not comfortable with the level of risk that will be involved in this thing. That's all I have.
I think that's great information. And I think it's hard to understand the amount of risk and responsibility and commitment until you're in it. And I will say, have a few landlord friends, maybe a landlord mentor. If you're going to be passive, if you're going to make this, if you're just house hacking so you can have affordable living, so you aren't necessarily doing a significant number of units, you don't have 20 units and so forth, so you don't have an attorney on retainer, just to have a circle is huge.
Yes.
So
Yes.
just that circle of people that you can call and say, oh my goodness, I can't believe this just happened. And somebody's gonna say, yeah, that happened to me 3 years ago.
Yeah.
That is important. That sense of
Very
community, having somebody that you can confide in and share an experience and share how the heck to get out of it. There are things that you just never really anticipate will occur. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't even know I would need this vendor or what have you. And so having that sense of community, people that you can call and lean on, that's imperative. Brittany says Shannon is always full of great information. Thank you. And so in closing, of course, make sure you join us next week. I'll be posting the speaker for next week pretty soon. And then make sure you join us over on Eureka. And this is definitely for any of our business owners. And like Shannon said, business owners are landlords as well, because I have a basic business license for my property. I have a certificate of occupancy for my property as well. And if it is not in good standing, I cannot evict.
That's right.
Huge.
Oh, clean hands.
That's huge.
Gotta have clean hands.
So if you're just looking to do just real estate, any of those, there are a number of resources that are over on the Eureka side. So take a look at the link and join us over there as well. Get some great mentors, get some great advisors. There are people that are donating their time. So if you need a CPA, an attorney, so forth, those resources are over there, and they're doing their work to match people who need a couple of hours of service as well. So I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. And until next Monday, we'll see you then.
Bye, guys.